Hello friends, today we're going to be talking about how to get out of a land contract. Is it even possible to get out of a land contract? Well, by the end of this video, you'll understand how to navigate the challenges of exiting a land contract while protecting your financial interests and avoiding any legal issues. Few things are scarier than being in a situation in real estate that you feel like you can't get out of. And dealing with land contracts can be one of those things that make you feel that way. Have you ever wondered what your options are if you wanted to get out of a land contract early? Curious about the legal ramifications and how to avoid costly mistakes? Well, stay tuned as I break down the best approaches by first helping you understand what land contracts are and how they differ from traditional contracts. Secondly, I want to make sure you understand both the buyer and the seller's mindset when it comes to land contracts. And finally, I'm going to unpack how you get out of one. If you're ready, let's go. So what is the main difference between a traditional real estate purchase and sale agreement and a land contract? A land contract is a financing agreement with terms that have been negotiated by the buyer and the seller. As such, the provisions within a land contract can really vary widely based on the situation that both the buyer and the seller are in, and they aren't subject to any conforming requirements that are many times put in there by bank or traditional financing. In contrast, mortgages are highly structured in a certain way, but many times they come with very predictable interest and mortgage rates based off of the current market conditions. With a land contract, the seller can set the mortgage payment at a fixed rate for as long as they want, and it's going to be at their discretion. In addition, with a traditional land contract, the seller retains property ownership of that property until the land contract is paid in full and all the conditions have been met within that land contract agreement. So as you get to the end of the land contract, if you're the buyer, prior to that last payment, the buyer can protect themselves with something called lis pendens. L-I-S space P-E-N-D-E-N-S. Lis pendens, it's a Latin term, and this is what it means. It's a notice with the local office, like the recorder's office within the municipality or the county. This serves as evidence of a land contract in the event that the seller attempts to enter into a contract with another buyer. So this is going to protect you as the buyer to make sure that it's recorded with the proper government agency to know that you are in a land contract with the seller, so they can't go around your back and offer it to somebody else, to another buyer. So what are the components and the benefits and potential challenges for both the buyer and the seller when it comes to a land contract? So for the buyer, it is a great alternative if you, the buyer, cannot find traditional financing to buy the home. Because it's seller financed, you don't have to provide a lot of that financial documentation that a bank requires. Plus, if you've been in a challenging situation where your credit history has been hurt, or maybe you don't have enough time to build up a credit history, this can be a great alternative to get into a home. Or if you fell on hard financial times previously, whether it was a foreclosure or a short sale, it's going to be extremely difficult to get a traditional loan. So a land contract could be a good solution to bypass a traditional mortgage to get into a home utilizing a land contract. So what about the seller? Well, because the seller is becoming the bank and they're utilizing some creative ways to do this, and they're not as strict as a traditional mortgage company, and many times they're allowing somebody to get into the property without much of a down payment, because that could be one other thing that's a challenge for the buyer. They might not have enough money to put down as a down payment. And so the seller, knowing that and agreeing to that, can potentially charge more of an interest rate than a bank would, and I would definitely recommend doing so. Here's one other benefit to the seller's land contract, and this is probably the biggest one. If the buyer stops making payment, the seller keeps every single previous payment made by the buyer, and they can evict them from the property. Versus a traditional mortgage, the bank has to go through what's called a foreclosure process, and that can take 90 to 180 days, and something that costs a ton of money. That's why a land contract is really beneficial for the seller. It takes a whole lot less time to finalize a land contract than a traditional mortgage if you're the seller, right? So getting that done, just agreeing upon the price, the interest rate, the payments, the cadence, all that stuff. Whereas a traditional mortgage, getting that done might take 60 to 90 days. As I mentioned, land contracts really benefit the seller. And this is something that made a lot of sense to me. In a land contract, you as the seller can act like the landlord, but with none of the landlord responsibilities, because the buyer is responsible for the maintenance, the repairs, the taxes, and insurance. You are not responsible for that for the seller, but if they stop making payments, you can evict them like a landlord without going through that foreclosure process that I'd mentioned. So that is probably one of the biggest benefits of a land contract, especially if you're the seller. So now that we understand what a land contract is, the components from both the buyer and the seller side, let's dive into the most important question of this video, and that is, how do you get out of a land contract? Well, one way to do it is to have a mutual agreement between the buyer and the seller. You can negotiate as the buyer with the seller to release you from this land contract. This may involve you making a generous offer, like forfeiting your deposit, paying some legal fees, or paying the seller for their time. One other way that becomes a little bit in the gray area is finding within that land contract fraudulent statements. If you can prove that the vendor or the seller made a fraudulent statement, you may be able to forego or cancel the contract. For example, if the seller made false claims about the property itself or misleading representation of the property, that can be considered a fraudulent statement. And by doing so, that might allow you to get out of a land contract. Another way to get out of it is called contract rescission. And this is where you might be able to get out of the contract because it is rescinded because of multiple things that might have happened. One of those is potential fraud. Number two is a material error in the contract or other applicable circumstances that I would definitely recommend going to an attorney to ask about, specifically an attorney that has knowledge in real estate and land contracts. Overall, it is extremely difficult to get out of a land contract. Specifically, if you are a buyer that is engaged in a land contract, you've got to understand you are in this land contract because it is a seller financing tool, and the seller is taking some pretty big risks, allowing you to get into a property with very little or no down payment and with maybe a credit history or some other challenging financial implications that were in your past, but allowing you to get into this home. So it definitely benefits the seller, and getting out of it as a buyer can be extremely difficult. Not impossible, however, if you can find ways, and maybe there's even a negotiation within the contract where you can say, or if this situation arises, I can get out of the land contract. Negotiating that up front is probably going to be your best bet to be able to get out of a land contract. If you know there might be a situation down the road, or you know some clause that could benefit you as the buyer, putting that in initially to allow you to be able to get out of it, and even letting the seller know that hey, if this happens or if I exercise this clause within this land contract, I want to compensate you X or Y to be able to do that. That negotiate up front is so much better than trying to get out of it in the heat of the battle. So those are some things that I've seen with land contracts and trying to get out of those that could potentially work. But if you've ever been in a land contract, whether you're the buyer or the seller, I'd be interested in your feedback. So please comment below. Let's engage in a dialogue. As always, just for stopping by and watching this video, I have a free gift for you. It is a short-term rental calculator where you go ahead and put in the price of the home, the income, the expenses, and this software will actually spit out to you whether this is a good deal or not. It's 100% free. No obligation. Just click on the link below, aaronsfreetraining.com. Thanks for stopping by. Have an amazing day.